Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Chaf Aleph in Zbachim, as we learn for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Asur Masar V'Shivya. Hopefully, the war will be over very soon. Yesterday's daf was daf Chaf, and we said we were going to pick it up from 19 lines from the bottom of Chaf on Beis, where the podcast left you off. The discussion on yesterday's daf was this: we're still talking about Kiddush Yadayim B'Raglayim. The hands and the feet of the Kohanim who served in the Beis Hamikdash had to be washed each morning. We said the Kohen Gadol also has to wash 10 times on Yom Kippur. However, the times between the various changing of the clothes are not ma'akiv, but you have to wash in the morning, or else the avoda that you do is puzzle. So the question is this: if you washed your hands, we talked about does lina puzzle if you stayed overnight and at daybreak you have to wash again. That was a machlokas we had before between Rebbe and Reb Lazar. Shimon, right? We had that machlokas before, but the question over here now is the Gemara is raising is if you washed your hands and you went outside the Azara, would you have to wash again? So that question was raised, and we tried to bring proofs, but we're not going to really see a solid proof. So Toshma Para, about 19 lines from the bottom of the page. Toshma Para, by the Para Duma. What's the halacha there? Where do you fresh? You have to wash before the Kohen. Now, we know the process is all done, the procedures are all done on Hara Mishcha, Hara Zaysim, not in the Beis Hamikdash. But you have to, the Kohen who does the avoda who does the avoda with the paraduma has to wash his hands with the klisharis inside the Beis Hamikdash. And then he goes out. He doesn't have to do it inside the Azara. He could do it outside, and even on a non-sacred vessel. He could use that, even with a non-sacred vessel. Just wash his hands. Even just use any earthenware fire pot. Just wash your hands. The minimalist way to do it. Just wash your hands, period. Doesn't have to do with that. What do you see over here? You see that even outside the Beis Hamikdash, washing of the hands can be done. So if you washed your hands and you went outside the Beis Hamikdash, it's not a problem. Outside, it's not a problem. We see when it comes to paraduma. Amar Papa says, no, you can't bring a proof from paraduma. Shiny parahol. Everything is done outside. The paraduma, all the work is done outside. We're talking about when a Kohen has to do the avodas of the karbanos inside the Beis Mikdash, and he washed his hands, and then he went outside. Does he have to wash again? So, but paraduma, you can't prove. Since everything is done, low possible, you see doesn't have an effect going outside the basement, doesn't have, because everything is like that. Everything you do, the burning of the paraduma and the processing, everything is done outside, so you can wash there too. If that's the case, if it's all done outside, what do you have to wash it all for? You're going outside the Beis Hamikdash. You don't have to be in the what do you have to wash for it all? So it's kain avoda pnim, because we want to do it something like that. In other words, even though, as we said, the paraduma is really only as dushas bedek abayis. It doesn't have Kedushas Mizbeach. Still, we want it to be something like that. So it's a proper thing to wash your hands, but it's certainly not ma'akav to do it in the Beis Hamikdash. So Gemara doesn't really answer our question. You boil to another question. Tuma ma'u shetol kishugam. Let's say you washed your hands. The Kohen washed his hands and feet in the Beis Hamikdash. He did the kishugam, and then he became tamei. Now in the Havamina, we're assuming over here now that all he did was he was matame his hands. Right? Rashi says over here. What do we mean with your hands? When a person's tummy, his whole body is tummy, is it not? Yes, that's by the system of Raisa. If you touched a dead sheriff, so you would touch a dead body, a carcass, whatever, a cadaver, your tummy, your whole body's tummy. But the rabbis set up various rules to say that to keep things away. For example, piggle. We don't want piggle. So we had yesterday, actually, in this daf, for example, piggle or nosar. You're not supposed to be mafagel on an animal. We talked about that one day, I think last week or the week before. We're going to talk about piggle. It's going to be a big issue in this Gemara. What is that? When you had a bad machshava, when you did one of the avodas, you had a machshava that you're going to, let's say, eat the carbon, or you're going to be makar of the carbon on this bath outside of the time limit. That makes the animal piggle. And so what? So it's piggle. You can't eat it. If you should eat it, you get karas. Doesn't say in the Torah that you're tummy if you touch it, but the rabbi said if you touch it, your hands are tummy. You got to wash. Your hands are tummy, not you. That's a tummy rabbanim. So we're assuming now that the Gemara is asking that question. If you did kiddush and then your hands became tummy, tuma, says the Gemara, does that necessitate another washing of the hands and feet? If you tell me going out, we don't know. We couldn't prove that going out of the Beis Hamikdash necessitates a further Kiddush Yadayim Reglayim. We couldn't prove that, but that's maybe why the Gav Chazi, because the person the person himself is pure. He's not been defiled in any way. But over here, where his hands have become tummy drabanim, and he can't do the avoda, so maybe he had a lapse of concentration from doing the avoda, because his hands are tummy now, so he sort of like forgets about it, and therefore he does need Kiddush Yadayim Reglayim. Odilma, keep it out of chazi, since he can wash his hands and become purified again. So Dakla, he's careful. It's very medactic for low masach taitan. He says, I'm not going to, I know I just have to wash my hands and I'm going back in. So that's our question. Tashma, we're going to bring a proof from here. Kiddush Yadayim Reglayim. Kiddush Yadav Raglav. Person did Kiddush Yadayim Reglayim, let's say a coin. Benitmu, and they became Tameh. Matbilon, you can go to the mikveh. Vein Sarach Lekadosh. Vein Sarach Lekadosh. He doesn't have to do Kiddush Yadayim Reglayim. All he has to do is be Tovil then. Now Rashi says over here, there's no real Rashi on there, but the assumption over here is he goes to the mikveh, he doesn't need Kiddush Yadayim Reglayim. So the Gemara says, no, Yadav Lami Boilan. We're not talking about over here where he was just matami his hands, because notice he says matbilon. Matbilon sounds going on his hands. It doesn't say tovel, puts his whole body in matbilon, puts his hands in, right? So matbilon, all he has to do is be tovel his hands. So he said, oh, you're only talking about being tovel his hands. If he wasn't really tummy in a Torah, he wasn't defiled. He simply, his hands became tummy like he touched pigul or noser, like Rashi mentioned before. That's no question. Of course, you don't need Kiddush Yadayim Reglayim. The question was, his whole body became tummy. It's the rice. He touched, let's say, a dead reptile. So it didn't Makol Gufo. So it's called Gufo. Typically, why don't you say Kiva the boy Lemed Ben Hair of Shemesh? I'll tell you the problem. If his whole body became tamei, he has to go to the mikveh and wait for sundown. So if he has to wait for sundown, certainly a suchet day. A guy at 10 o'clock in the morning, Cohen. At 6 o'clock in the morning when they got up, he washed his hands. 10 o'clock, he became tamei. There was a dead reptile there, crawled in and died, and he touched it. Okay, now he's tamei. Okay, he goes to the mikveh, but he has to wait for sundown. So if he has to wait for sundown, certainly he got distracted, let's say, a suchet that he's distracted, he's not longer concentrating, and he should have to do Kiddush Yadayim Reglayim. The answer is no, could go and eat me samach l'shkia sechama. Maybe became tamei. Shkia now is 6:26, 6:25. He became tamei at 6:20. So he says, okay, I went to the mikveh at 6:22. Few minutes will be sundown. That's enough. Maybe he wasn't Meshachas Daite. So he can't prove it from there either. Tashma will bring again the proof from the same case we started with, the para. Tashma, para of Chiya Bar Yosef, Mekadosh Miklisharis Bifnim, right? That's what we started with today. That Rav Chiya Bar Yosef says that there's a lot of Rav Chiya Bar Yosef in this Gemara. He was Osik in Zbachim, obviously. He said that you wash your hands b'fnim, the Yosef, and you can go out for the paraduma. The same price we just started with a few minutes ago. You could even wash outside, like people call even in a non-sacred vessel, even in a earthenware fire pot. But para, the tmuya matmila, listen to this. By para, the Kohen who does the boda of the para, we make him tamei on purpose. Why? The famous Gemara, we had it many times. We're matame him, and then we send him to the mikveh, and then he does the avoda. Why? The Kohen who burnt the para, we on purpose make him tamei. We defile him, make sure that he's tamei. And then we put him in the mikveh. Remember that Tzdukim said they have their own rules, right? That Tzdukim said that the one who does the paraduma has to be purified and he has to wait for sundown. Well, they're wrong about that. Because this is not Kosher Mizbeach, it's Kosher Berekabai, it's the Paraduma. The Paraduma you could do even if you didn't wait for sundown. So what they did was to show the Stukim that they're wrong. They said they made him tamei on purpose and put him in the mikveh and then immediately did the avoda with him on the Paraduma, showing that you don't have to wait for sundown. But the point is, they were matame him on purpose. Shayomrim, because the Stukim used to say, Murav Shemesh was only done by people who had Terah Shemesh. So what do you see over here? You see over here, and it doesn't say that he had Kiddush Yadayim Reglayim anymore. All they did was they put him in the mikveh. Rashi says in the third line, miyad hu mesadra maracha v'sorfa am achar hakiddush hazeh haisa b'shma min lo pasla tuma. Didn't ruin it. Nearly, I guess he says, okay, so the Gemara is going to give a different. So we're going to get to the answer in a second. But the Gemara proves from here that he was tamei, and you didn't need Erev Shemesh. So the question was, if you became tamei, do you need again Kiddush Yadayim B'Reglayim? Here it's mashma. The Kohen did the Parah Aduma. They made him tamei on purpose. Because why did they make him tamei on purpose? To show the student that they're wrong. You don't have to wait for Erev Shemesh. But the point is, they made him tamei, and there was no Kiddush Yadayim B'Reglayim afterwards. They immediately did the work. Shema Mina Lo Paslaba. So you see again that Lo Paslaba Tumah, that Tumah does not ruin the Kiddush Yadayim B'Reglayim. In other words, we were mashing before that we couldn't prove left the base of Mikdash after you Kiddush Yadayim B'Reglayim if you have to do Kiddush again. Do you have to do Kiddush again? We're going to just say the word Kiddush. Kiddush does not mean Kiddush on Shabbos. So you don't have to make Kiddush. You mean Kiddush Yadayim B'Reglayim. So maybe there by leaving the base of Mikdash, your mind was still on it, so you don't need another Kiddush. What about if you became tummy? Here it's mashma. Even if you became tummy, you don't need another Kiddush. Marsh again, no. Shiny para hole that full yom law is possible. Since it's full yom, a person who went to the mikveh but didn't have hair of shemesh yet that day does not ruin the para aduma, the performance of the para aduma by the kohen who is tamei, who's at full yom. So therefore, it's an ihachi lam lida makadosh. So if that's the case, again, para aduma is not really kachim mizbeach. So you could say the reason you're eating a Kiddush Yadayim B'Reglayim is because since it's full yom, it's not ruined. So therefore, you don't need since it's full yom, doesn't have to wait for Erev Shemesh, and he could do the avoda, so he doesn't. You don't need also another Kiddush. So if that's the case again, why do you even do Makash? Like we said before, kain avoda bina. You need something like avoda. In other words, it's similar to avoda, so you do Kiddush Yadayim B'Reglayim. But if you became tamei, it's clearly that there you wouldn't have to do Kiddush Yadayim B'Reglayim again. But our question is, if you became tamei and you're doing a vote in the base of Mikdash, and that question is not answered. Now, how was the kior done? Avram asked at the beginning of this year about the Yam Shel Shlomo. We'll look into that. But the kior, what they call the laver, was like a big urn, big beautiful urn with water in it, not hot water, just water. And they were Makash Yadayim from there. So what they did was there were various spouts on there, and some say there was a cup, whatever. But they just turned on the faucet, the spout, whatever, and the water came out. What about, can you put your hands into the kior? Can you do it that way? Not by having the water come out with a spout with a faucet, but can you actually put your hands inside? Mimenu, says, from the kior, you should take water. It means it comes out of the kior. You take it from there, not inside. Even inside too. Tashma, let's bring a proof from here. Okay, it said we had this before. Let's say you were tova, you immersed yourself. Meimara means in a pit, like a mikveh, right? Right? You have to have a proper Kiddush Yadayim B'Reglayim. Even if you went into the mikveh of a full mikveh, it's still your puzzle. Hamei kior dumi meipar, but mashma if you went into the mortar of the kior, something like the mortar, because there's only a pit which is like a mikveh, that is no good. Mashma that you could put your hands and feet into the kior. It says lo. Meimar is the chiddush is this. Shalotam, you might say, Kol gufo tovel ben yadav ragav v'koshkein. You might say, listen, if you could put your whole body in there, you could tovel. If you could do that, so certainly hands and feet should certainly be okay, right? And as if it's mitar your whole body, it could certainly be mitar yadav layo. Kamash mono that it's no good. Says Rashi.
Muslims have their mask. Have its big circular thing with water. That spouts on the side, just like you described.
They probably got it from us. Yeah, they probably got it from the base of Mikdash. A lot of things that they follow, a lot of the customs that Goyim got, you could trace it back to things that were in the base of Mikdash. So Rashi says a little bit above where it says Shita, he says, can't put your hands into the kior. You have to get the water out of there. It's a good mikvah. Adifi mikvah. Shein shuvim. Number one, mekir or mei shuvim. They are not. The fact that they're in a vessel says that they're mei shuvim. Mei shuvim is not like a natural running water, right? the kiddush ein kan, and there is no kiddush with tefillah ein kan. In other words, you might say that what hadith for this is better because kior is meishuven, and therefore there's no kiddush and there's also no tefillah. Aval hocha tefillah ika, right? Kamash. So you might think, okay, listen, it's better because in the kior, number one, it's kiddush and you weren't makaj, you didn't take the water out. Tefillah and kan, you certainly weren't tovel in there, but tefillah might be good. Kamashma tefillah so good, but it could be Meikir is also good. So that question is not decided. That's like the third question that we had now that hasn't been decided. Instead of drawing the water out of the kior to go out to do kiddush reglayim, can you put your hands and feet in there? So we can't prove that.
Over your feet and trying to get.
It's pretty hard. You need three guys to hold them. Right. Amar Chiya bar Yosef. So Chiya bar Yosef, we had him before. It's going to say a big kiddush. Now let's understand something. The mei kior, the water in the kior, we talked before about if you washed your hands and then you had daybreak pass by, right? You had daybreak afterwards, right? That's lina, it's puzzle. Just like a carbon becomes puzzle, you can't eat it. Let's say a regular carbon, let's say a shlomin or a chatas. You can eat it the whole day and the whole night. Once it's daybreak, that's it. It's no tar, it's no sar, it's no good, right? So that's called lina. It's possible lina, it stayed overnight. Lina means it stayed overnight. So when does overnight happen? At daybreak. Okay, we understand that, but there's also an inyan that things that we're going to discuss this now. Okay, so that's daybreak, things that stay overnight. The water itself in the kior had to be sunken into the ground so that at daybreak it wouldn't become puzzle itself. That water was also puzzle, was drawn from, let's say, natural places, but now it's in a kior, right? So now it also had to be sunk into the ground so that it shouldn't be considered lina. It shouldn't be considered possible lina, like nosar. Okay, so when did it have to be sunk into the ground? There are certain avodas that can only be done during the day. We've discussed this many times. Shchita, kabbalah, zrika, the main parts of doing an animal, shechting it, the dam, zrika has to be done until sundown. That's it. What can be done at night? Being makdei murim, aktar murim, burning the fats, etc., burning the animal. That can be done the whole night. So we're going to say like this. We're going to have a three machlokas here, a two-way machlokas. Amar of Chiya bar Yosef. Mei kior, the water in the kior itself, nifsalin, also becomes possible lina when limatirin kematirin. Listen to this. What's matir? Matir is matir, the carbon to be eaten. Matir, the person gets his kapara. What are those things? Those are the regular processes. Shchita, kabbalah, chazrika. So when does it become possible matirin? Kematirin. According to Chiya bar Yosef, that water has to be sunk into the ground before shkia, not at daybreak overnight, not to stay overnight and put it into the ground before daybreak so it won't be lina. No, since for those things, if you're going to use that water to purify yourself, to do shchita, kabbalah, chazrika, things that you have to do during the day, it's got to be sunk into the ground before the day. Let's say today is Sunday. You got to put it into Shkia Sunday night, but before Shkia Sunday, so that you could use it the next day on Monday for the Shchita Kabbalah Chazrika for the Kohen. We're going to do that. So he says, Nifson lematirin, for the matir, for to be used for the matir v'shimoza, it's got to be put into the ground before sundown. Le'evarim kevarim, but the evarim, the limbs that are burnt on the mizbeach, let's say if an ola, or the fatty parts, aktar sevarim, aktar semurim ve'evarim, that can be done the whole night. So when does that have to be sunk into the ground? Before daybreak. Before daybreak. After the night's over, before daybreak. So he says, so again, in other words, if you want to be guaranteed that you can use them the next day, if it's for shchita kabbalah chazrika, you got to put it into the ground. In other words, just like shchita kabbalah chazrika only becomes puzzle at sundown. That's when you can't do shchita kabbalah chazrika after sundown. So the water has to be the water that's going to purify you the next day also has to be into the ground before sundown of the previous day. If you're going to use this water the next day on Monday, you have to, you put it into the ground so that it's not over on lina. Lina means if it's outside of the ground. They sunk the whole thing into the ground.
Right. So every day
they did that every day. They had to sink the whole kior into the ground. Exactly. They sunk to the ground. Otherwise, if it's above ground, it would be. We'll talk about it. We mentioned the other day there was a pulley system that were able to lower it and raise it. Okay, so So again, you have to understand Rav Chia Bar Yosef. He's saying that in order to use the water the next day for Shchitik Balachas Rika, for things that can only be done during the day, they had to be, in other words, those things can't be done at night. So the kir had to be sunk into the ground before sundown of the day before, so you could use it the next day. If you're going to use it for a varim, if the voda that the Kohen's going to do is, let's say, burning day varim, let's say he comes into the night shift and he's going to do a night, so that water you could use it at night. Therefore, it had to be sunk in. It only had to be sunk in before daybreak. That's Rav Chia Bar Yosef. Rav Chisda Amar, Af l'matir nein of Salam b'Mashachar. No, there's only one time that it has to be sunk into the ground, by daybreak. Whether you're going to use it the next day for Shchitik Balachas Rika or you're going to use it at night, it's only got to be sunk in at before daybreak, and then after daybreak it's brought out. Kevarim. Af matirin, even for the things that are matir, the carbon to be eaten, let's say, and the person to get a skapara, it only becomes possible at daybreak, just like the Ivarim. So that's the second shita. Rabbi Yochanan, which is apparently a third shita, Yochanan Amar, Kior Kivin Shishaku Shuvei Maleo. No. Once you stick it in the ground before sundown, you don't bring it up. Now, what does that mean? You can't use it at night. In other words, he said like this. In other words, Chia Bar Yosef said, listen, if you want to use it for next day, for the let's say the daytime procedures, it's got to be sunk into the ground during the daytime before sundown. If you use it for the nighttime, then you could just, as long as it's sunk into the ground at the end of the nighttime, then the night shift, then it's okay. Rav Chisda says no, it's good enough. Just put them into for whatever you're going to do the next day, as long as it's in the ground before daybreak. That's good enough. Rav Yochanan says once you put it into the ground, apparently by sundown, you don't take it out anymore. You can't even use it for night work. From Rabbi Yosef, how does that make sense? You can't even use it for night work. Says Rashi about halfway down is in the wide line. Before Shkia, you don't bring it up. We're assuming the mifsal. In other words, you can't even use it at nighttime for about a slave. Meaning, if a guy's going to do work at night, let's say one of the Kohanim's he says, okay, it's my shift. I'm going to be burning day morim at night. He's got to be washed during the day. You can't even wash at night. That's what he's apparently saying. Rabbi Yosef himself doesn't say that. If you didn't put it down by sundown, you could still use it, even if you didn't put it down, even if you didn't sink it into the ground before sundown, you could use it for nighttime work. Not for the next day. The next day. Now, we're not sure what that L'machar Ein Mekadosh means. We're assuming now L'machar Ein Mekadosh, you can't use it the next day, right? If you didn't put it into the ground, Be'erev, you can still use it for night, but you can't use it the next day. Does it mean you can't use it the next day, or you don't need to? We'll see. At this point, we're assuming you can't use it the next day. So what do you see over here? It says you put it in the ground, you can't bring it up at night. So how do Rabbi Yochanan say? Rabbi Yochanan says, but you said you could use it at night. So how can you say you can't bring it up at night? You're not allowed to bring it up at night. It becomes possible. If you didn't put it in by sundown, it becomes even possible for night work. Here it says that you could use it for night work. If you didn't put it on, you can mekadosh it for at night. Well, the makayin mekadosh says mayin malay nami to kamar lavadas yom. It means you don't have to bring it for avodas yom. Avodas lai lochazi. Okay, so if that's the case, he so he's really saying the same thing as Rabbi Yosef, meaning that for daytime work, it's got to be stuck into the ground before daybreak, before sundown, while it's still daytime. For night work, it can stay the whole night. That's the same thing as Rabbi Yosef. What's he adding on? He's saying the exact same thing as the first opinion. So we don't have three opinions, we have two. Question is this: does it have to be put into the ground or not? Rabbi Yochanan says here, meaning you have to put it into the ground. It could really be out of the ground. You could use it still at night, but we're afraid that if you don't put it into the ground at sundown, you won't put it out before daybreak either. That's his point. It says Rashi, the top Rashi on the page. It's not puzzle, right? We're afraid that if you don't put it in at sundown, you might not put it back in by daybreak. We're afraid that if you take it out at night, you might not put it back in. He goes really like the second opinion. Who is the second opinion of Chisda? So the Gemara is going to say, isn't that the same as of Chisda? He didn't say it's possible. He says, don't bring it up. What is Rabbi Yochanan's lashon? Rabbi Yochanan says, don't bring it up again. He's like saying, be careful. Don't bring it up at night, because if you bring it up at night, you might not put it back in. But the truth is, it's only possible if you didn't put it up before daybreak. And that's why he didn't say it's possible. Lashon Isra Halah. Shaligim will only possible to keep in the Kedshel B'kli Shars Mitzvah Sham Kishar Kachim. When we about Allah and Mitzvah will come apart. It's the same as the second opinion. In other words, you can leave the kiyar outside all day, all night. Just make sure you put it in before sundown. Rav Chia said, didn't ask her to bring it up. He says, if it's outside at night, it's puzzle. It's puzzle for avodas mater. That's what he says. Rav Chia said, if you're going to use it the next day for shchitik balachas rika, you better put it in before sundown. If you're going to use it the next day for avodas laila, for like that tarsei murim, it only has to be put in before daybreak. That's just it's been. But in other words, if you bring it up at night, it's puzzle for avodas yom. So he's saying it's puzzle, whereas Rav Yochanan is simply saying that it's a good idea. Put it into the ground so that you shouldn't be over on the. But he agrees with the second opinion. But the question then is, isn't that the same as Rav Chisda? The Gemara is going to come to that. But first, the Gemara asks a different question. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan is really saying the same thing at this point as the second opinion is Rav Chisda. But the question isn't he saying, or we're assuming now that he's saying like Chia Bar Yosef, because Chia Bar Yosef says the Chia said it's possible if you had the water there outside at night, it's not good the next day. It's not good the next day if it stayed out, if it wasn't sunken into the ground before sundown, then it's so good the next day. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan said it's okay, it's still good the next day, but you better make sure it's in there before daybreak. Now the Gemara at the end of the first line on Amid Bey says, we had this the other day, yesterday's Daf. Rabbi Yochanan said like this, even though you're supposed to, right, the water's supposed to be staying in the ground at daybreak. It's supposed to be in the ground at daybreak, and you only take it out afterwards. But let's say they brought it out, so we kaddish the hands of the Trumas Hadesh, the one who did the Trumas. What's the Trumas Hadesh? And the first avoda done is to remove a Kohen who won the lottery to do Trumas Hadesh, which is removing ashes from the Mizbeach first thing in the morning. He has to wash his hands. Well, that's before daybreak. He doesn't have to wash again. Even though that was early in the day, so to speak, before daybreak. But if you brought it out for him, he doesn't have to wash again. So Bishlam Rava, who owns the Mukum Lahi, Rav Shimon. Rava, we had this the other day, yesterday's Daf, or really had before even. Bishlam Rava, the Mukum Lahi, Rav Shimon. He says, oh no, the one who says you don't have to wash again is Rav Shimon, who says that if you washed once, that's good for 10 days. As long as you didn't stop, you could just keep on working. If you could work straight through, you don't have to wash. So he says, this idea that you don't have to wash again, that goes to Rav Shimon. Okay, so Rav Shimon's that, Karebi. And over here, when Rabbi Yochanan says this idea over here, that if it's not up by day, if the water's not sunken in by daybreak, it's no good, that goes like Rebbe, who says that, that lina puzzles. It puzzles both your hands. If your hands went through daybreak, you have to wash again. Each daybreak, you have to wash again. And here we're talking about the water itself. Ella, the water itself becomes puzzle. The water in the kir. Ella Abaye, the Mukula Karevi. Abaye, who says what? That case is going according to Rebbe. And he says what? Why is it going according to Rebbe? Because he said that this is only drabanan, the hands of the washing. In other words, because he had washed already, and now the water's not there anymore. So his hands are, Rebbe said you have to wash again. That's the drabanan. But if you say you have to wash again, kasha the Rebbe at the Rebbe. Why do you say ma'ishna hasam the mashkale? Why over here on Amid Beis, Rabbi Yochanan just said you got to put the water, you got to sink the water into the ground before daybreak. U'ma'ishna hacha the lo mashkale. Now we're saying that Rabbi Yochanan really goes he doesn't go exactly like Rav Chia, because he's really going like Rav Chisda, because he said, do you have to put it in or not? Is it Xera Shikur or not? This is what we said. Rabbi Yochanan said that it's possible mishum avodas hayom. It's not like the Nida really apostles it. like Rav Chia, but Shema, you won't put it in. Maybe you won't put it in. But he says you do have to sink it in before daybreak, before sundown. So over here, why over here? Listen to carefully. When Rabbi Yochanan said the hacha and the hasan was a little bit confusing. The hacha is the case we just said here now on the top of the page. The Rabbi Yochanan said if you washed your hands for Trumas Hadeshen, you don't have to wash again at daybreak because it's a few minutes later. You don't have to do it again. So why over there does he apparently say you don't have to wash again? Mashma, we're assuming that the laver, the kior, is also out of the ground already. For that, you don't have to put it back in. And over here in this case, and it's in this case where you wash your hands for Trumas Hadeshen, apparently you don't have to sink it in again. And yet, Rabbi Yochanan said here on Amar Aleph, Rabbi Yochanan said that when you have to put it into the ground, you have to keep it in the ground until after daybreak. So why did he say that? In other words, again, Rabbi Yochanan said on Amud Aleph that you have to put the water, you have to put the kior into the ground and make sure that it's there at daybreak, that it's underground at daybreak. And over there, it's mashma that if you took it out for Trumas Hadeshen, you don't have to wash again. So you don't have to wash again, meaning you just leave it out. So Gemara says no. Why on Amud Aleph here do we say mashkalei ma'ishahach over here in Amud Beis, which is referring to the case we had before in Daf Chav, that once you took it out for Trumas Hadeshen, the Kohen doesn't have to wash his hands again at daybreak. The answer is the Masalklei b'hara mashkalei. No, the answer is that he really does put it back in, right? And then mashkalei, and then he puts sunken again. In other words, when the Kohen, all he means is this: the Kohen who did the Trumas Hadeshen and washed his hands for Trumas Hadeshen, even though it's really before daybreak, he doesn't have to wash again at daybreak. He just washed a few minutes ago. He doesn't wash again. But the kior itself is sunk into the ground. They take it out for the Trumas Hadeshen guy, but then they do put it into the ground. So he's not, Rabbi Yochanan's not a steerer with himself. He's saying they both go like Rebbe, that at daybreak, the Kohen has to wash again. But when it comes to the Kohen who did the Trumas Hadeshen, it's enough if he washed it a few minutes before. When he did the Trumas Hadeshen, he doesn't have to wash again. But the kior itself is put into the ground, meaning the mashkele, the answer is the masalikle, or the mashkele. They bring it up, they raise the kior from the ground to wash the hands of the Trumas Hadeshen guy. He doesn't have to wash again at daybreak, but the kior itself does have to be put in according to Bechel. But mashkele, they sink it in again. Ihachi, lemacher, ein makadesh, you say lemacher. It doesn't work. Am I? So why doesn't it work the next day? If they sunk it, if you're saying that he do sink, that everybody that according to Rabbi Yochanan, you sink it into the ground again before daybreak, even though you took it out a few minutes ago for the Trumas Hadeshen guy, but you sink to the ground. So why do you say that you can't use it the next day? Am I? The answer is ain't it tzarich mekadesh. That's the answer. The answer is no. He doesn't have to wash. He doesn't have to mekadesh the next day because it's already okay. It doesn't mean that the next day the water's no good. Means doesn't have to because you did sink it into the ground. So it doesn't need another kiddush. So if that's the case, okay, so now going back to the way we answered at the top of the page, we said that according to Rav Chia, if the water is outside at night, it's no good for washing the next day for avodas during the yom. Now we say, no. Rabbi Yochanan is only saying the water really could be out at night. You're just saying it's a good idea, put it into the ground. It's a mitzvah to put it into the ground, and so you don't come to leave it there overnight, that at daybreak it'll certainly be in the ground. But if that's the case, meaning for the avodas that are done during the day, like Shchit Kabbalah Chesrika, it's roiv the next day, even if the water was out at night. Hainu Rav Chisda. Remember Rav Chisda says, in order to avoid lina of the kior, it only has to be in at daybreak. Doesn't have to, in other words, at sundown, you don't have to put this kior into the ground, just put it in over, you can leave it out overnight and just put it in at daybreak. Mashma that what? Remember the matir and chazi, it's good. The same as Rav Chisda. You keep an eye on mitzvah shikur. The question is it a mitzvah to stink it into the ground or not? Rabbi Yochanan says it's a mitzvah to put it into the ground. Make sure you put it into the ground early on so that you shouldn't come to be over on that. Rav Chisda says you don't have to worry about it. If you put it in at daybreak, that's good enough. Before daybreak, it's good enough. So Rabbi Yochanan said it's a mitzvah to put it in before. Rashi, Iki B'nayu Mitzvah Shikua is about 20 lines from the bottom of the page, not the widest lines, 20 lines from the bottom of the page. The Rabbi Yochanan Mitzvah Shikua Me'Be'era. Put it in before the ground, put it in by sundown. So it shouldn't be in there. So it'll be there by Trumas Hadeshen before daybreak. And when they take it out from him, they'll put it back in. Well, the Rav Chisda loch mir kolkach. You got to put in before daybreak is good enough. Says the Gemara now, Meisvei. So Rav Chisda said, all you have to do is put it into the ground before daybreak. Meisvei. So the guy who did the Trumas Hadeshin, he was like the first guy up in the morning. And they didn't see him. They didn't actually see him. He was, let's say, blocked. The vision was blocked. They were in different rooms. They were in chambers. They were sleeping. Below Showman, as called, they didn't hear his voice either. Showman Kol Shel Eitz. They heard he said that the thing was sunk in. Remember, we said that Ben Cotton made this whole pulley system with wheels to lower the heavy duty kior into the ground. What they heard the noise of the wood. Also Ben Cotton made Muchni when he made these pulley wheels, the kior. They heard it. They heard the water. They heard the pulley system being raised. The wood and the cranking the wood. The straining of the wood with the pulleys. They heard that noise that made the noise. They know and said, "Oh, time to get up, boys. Time to get up. You heard that noise? Time to get up." Now we have the Houthis waking us up. We have this guy. They had the pulley system of the water being raised up, and that's what they heard. My love, doesn't that mean the Masalikle, Alma Mashkale? That means that they heard it being pulled up. Mashma, that it was put in before. In other words, at the time for Trumas Hadeshin, that was before daybreak. And if they heard that noise, what did they hear the noise? They heard it being lifted up. They heard it being lifted up. It's mashma that it was put into the ground the night before, not at daybreak. My love, the Masalik, they were raising it. Alma mashkele. So you see, they put it in before, not like Rav Chisda. Rav Yochanan said, you got to put it in the night before, make sure that it's in there the whole night, so that at daybreak for the Trumas Hadeshin, before daybreak, it'll be in the ground. It's mashma over here so it's mashma like Rav Yochanan, not like Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says enough. Leave it out the whole day. Leave it out the whole night. Just put it in the ground before daybreak. It's mashma over here that it was in the ground. Alma mashkele, it's mashma. They did put it in the ground, not like Rav Chisda. This is low. The mashkele, they heard him sinking into the ground. Oh. They heard him putting it back in after the Trumas Hadeshin guy. They heard him putting it in the ground. So either kamashkele, if you're lowering into the ground, you hear the noise. To lower into the ground, just have to lower it. Just drop it in. With a string or with a rope. You don't need a pulley system. The answer is mashkele begilgla. They did lower. They lowered it into the ground also. The same pulley wheel system that brought it up was the same system that brought it down. So it cranked and made noise even when they put it down. So they lowered it with some sort of a stone contraption which made noise. They did it on purpose. They could have lowered it in just by lowering it with ropes, right? But they didn't do it that way. They lowered it with the pulley system to make noise. So you should hear it. It will be heard. So that they'll hear about it and they'll come and they'll say, "Time to wash, boys." What did they need that alarm system to wake them up for? We had one of the jobs that the Kohanim had was there was a guy called Gvine, who was the crier, the town crier. "Wake up, boys!" They had a special Kohen who was a town crier. He woke them up. So he was their alarm system. What do they need this for? This is Beitreya. They had two different alarms.
Was there something watching place?
Yeah. It's a big place. Yeah. So again, that question is who was supposed to wake them up? Were they woken up by the pulley system, by the muchni, or were they woken up by the alarm guy, right? We used to call, what do they call it in Yiddish? The vecker. He was a vecker, the guy in yeshiva. There was a yeshiva guy who used to go around, take water, throw it in your face, wake you up, And when I was in yeshiva in Telz, I remember they had a new dormitory and they had an intercom system, and he would sing every day, Yisrael, Am Kadosh, Teituf, Lavoides, Haboirei, Rotzkatzvi, Vigibar Koari, Lasos, Ritzon, Avicha V'Shemayim. And half the guys were cursing at the intercom. Leave me alone, let me sleep, That's how it was. Okay, anyway, so the answer is Beitrei Hikeri Havu. There were two alarm systems. You always need a backup, right? Yeah. I know I set my alarm for 3:00 every day, and for 3:15 and for 3:30 in case I miss one, right? So you had two alarm systems there. What? Havu. Avdi Deshama Mehai. Some heard from this Aussie. Deshama Mehai Aussie. Some heard this one. Some heard that one. It's always good to have a backup system. Gufa. We had yesterday on Friday stuff, not on Shabbos stuff. We had on Friday. We mentioned we learned from the pasuk. It says what? Moshe, Aaron, Ubanov, right? I said Ubanov means the two sons. Michael corrected me afterwards. Ubanov simply means because it's two, but it's simple as two. So there's four people: Moshe, Aaron, and two sons. If the kir doesn't have enough to wash the hands and feet of four kohanim, it's got to be a shnema. Moshe, Aaron, Ubanov. It's got to be enough for four people. Meisvei. Call it kli mekachin. The truth is, you don't need the kior. You could be mekadosh from any kli code, any kli in the base of mikvah that held that kind of water is good enough. Color came in mekachin, bench base whether the head or revius, bench even if it doesn't have a revius, even if it's a small amount, and if it's even if it doesn't have a revius, it's not enough for four people. Ovachi klisha as long as the klisha is. So you see, you don't need four, you don't need so much water. Amarvada bar avos the girsa v'kodach matocho. Speaking about Rashi and Tosfos do it a little bit differently, but the idea is that they actually washed not from the kior directly, but a little cup or a spout or something that was stuck into the kior. It was stuck into the kior. They stuck spouts in there, and that's these small ones that we say it doesn't have to be revius, but the kior itself would have to have enough for four people. Ivami menu rachmana. Smash we have to do it directly from the kior, not from some little cup that you took. From Tosfos smash, but they actually took cup and stuck it into the kior. That took the cup and took water from the kior and washed with the cup. Rashi's mash was more like stuck in like spouts, but the point is mash mimenu rachmana. The answer is yirchasu l'rabos klishares. Even though it says mimenu, it says again yirchasu ubakar v'sam elam esbeach yirchatsu. Tell me that any klishares is good enough. Yachi klechol nami. So why can't you use a non-sacred vessel? If you don't have to use the kior, why can't you use a non-sacred vessel? Amar Abaya klichol l'matzasamrit. You can't use a non-sacred vessel. Kavachomer mikano. Kano is the base. Right? Es a kior, es kano, right? Now you have the kior, and it's sat on the base. Why? Uma kano, manach, the base of the kior. Shenim shachimo, that was anointed with the Shem Mishra, together with the kior. Ein makadesh, that you can't be used. Klichol, a non-sacred vessel, she'ein imshach, which is not, imshach was not anointed, and it didn't she'ein makadesh, so you can't use a non-sacred vessel. How do we know that you cannot use a vessel? Let's say you could put some water into the base. Can you wash from there? It's not exactly flat. It had a base, it had a little bit of an indentation. So the Tanya of Yomi, I think it was Kedech Shakir Makanash. Either one is good enough. Tamalomer, Vasisa Kior Nechoshes, Vakano Lechoshes. You should make the kior out of copper, brass, and make the base out of that. I only said that they're similar in that they have the same, they're constituted from the same material, but they can't, their purposes are different. You can't wash your hands from the kano. That's different because it's not made to be a receptacle to hold stuff inside. It's made to your klichol is made. It's a receptacle, could be used. So maybe klichol should be used. You're saying it's the kal v'chomer. If the kano, which is sanctified, you can't use that. So klichol, which is not sanctified, can't be used. No, maybe kano is different because it's not made for use as a receptacle, but klichol is. Ella. The fact is, the reason mimenu is from there. That comes to exclude klichol. Yachi klisharis nami. So maybe it excludes klisharis also. But we have an exclusion and an inclusion. Mimenu says use it from the kior and not something else. So we're going to exclude the klichol. Maybe it should exclude a klisharis, but we have an inclusion. We have a ribui that it includes more because Rabbi Rachmana Yirchasu. Umari says, so how do you know which one do you include, which one do you exclude? Do you include the klichol and exclude the kano, or do you include the kano and exclude klisharis rather? Do you include the klichol or include the klisharis? Says that Tom Mashiach, I'd rather use the klisharis because it requires anointing. So kano is excluded because number one, it's only mukash for nechoshes, not for anything else, and it wasn't made to be a receptacle. But the question is, can you use? You don't have to actually wash your hands from the kior. You could use any klisharis, but can you use a klichol? No, it's excluded from mimenu, and the inclusion of urchatztem. What's the word? Yirchatzu from yirchatzu is including klisharis. How do you know to include the klisharis and exclude the klichol? Obviously, he says that Klisharis is anointed. Klichol is not. So if I have an inclusion and an exclusion, I'll exclude the Klichol and I'll include the Klisharis. All right, we'll pick up from the two dots tomorrow. Have a good day, everybody. Shavua Tov. Kumar Tov.